Introduction: The Prison with No Bars. What if the biggest obstacle in your life has never been outside you? What if you have spent years, maybe decades, trying to remodel a house that isn't even yours, while the actual key to freedom was sitting right in your pocket the entire time? Let's sit down with a cup of coffee and talk about something a little strange, a little uncomfortable, but ultimately liberating. Picture this: you have decided to finally get your life organized. You buy a planner that costs more than a nice dinner out. You color-code your goals with highlighters that smell like fruit. You promise yourself that this Monday, yes, this Monday, is the day you become an entirely new person. Monday arrives, and somehow, Monday has apparently joined the witness protection program. You hit snooze 3 times, find yourself doom-scrolling on your phone for 40 minutes while staring at a ceiling tile, and by Tuesday afternoon, you are back to your old routines, wondering why your willpower has the shelf life of sliced avocado. Or consider a different scenario. Have you ever wondered why every single boss you have ever had somehow manages to remind you of your most intimidating high school science teacher? Or why can you spot someone else's toxic relationship patterns from across a crowded room with the precision of a tactical sniper, yet remain blissfully unaware that you are currently dating someone whose emotional availability resembles a brick wall? We tell ourselves we are just browsing online, just looking. And then somehow a package arrives 2 days later containing an item that even we don't remember ordering, and we are forced to look at the delivery driver with a completely fraudulent expression of surprise. Human beings can spot someone else's limiting beliefs from a mile away. Spotting our own. That is like trying to read the label from inside the bottle. Here is the hidden truth we are going to explore together in this audiobook: most people aren't trapped by circumstances. They are trapped by beliefs they don't even realize they're carrying. We spend our lives trying to change our circumstances. We change jobs, move to new cities, break up with partners, buy self-help books by the armful, download meditation apps with soothing rain sounds, and try out diets that require us to eat things that taste like crushed gravel, all while wondering why the scenery changes, but the emotional weather remains exactly the same. It is because the external world is merely a mirror. It is a projector screen. And no matter how much you yell at the characters on a movie screen to change their behavior, nothing on that screen will shift until you change the film roll spinning away quietly inside the projector booth. That projector booth is your subconscious mind. And the film rolling inside it is a collection of invisible mental beliefs installed throughout childhood, shaped by culture, reinforced by society, and hardened by every painful emotional event you ever survived. Think about how bizarre this really is. You are a capable, intelligent, resourceful adult. You can navigate complex software, drive a car through chaotic traffic while listening to a podcast, and figure out how to assemble flat-pack furniture without using half the screws. Yet, an invisible mental script can completely paralyze you the moment you think about asking for a raise, starting a creative project, or setting a healthy boundary with a difficult family member. Why? Because human beings live inside a mental prison with no physical bars. The walls of this prison are made of assumptions we never questioned. They are built out of sentences we heard when we were 7 years old, conclusions we drew after a painful breakup at 22, and cultural myths about what is safe, realistic, and appropriate for someone like us. These beliefs quietly influence how much money feels possible to earn before a subtle panic sets in. They dictate the exact level of happiness we allow ourselves to experience before we subconsciously sabotage things just to bring ourselves back to our baseline of familiar stress. They decide which opportunities we notice and which ones we walk right past, convincing ourselves that we are being practical, when we are actually just being terrified. Most people go their entire lives without ever seeing these walls. They think their limitations are facts of nature. They think, I'm just not a confident person, or money is always a struggle for my family, or I always attract emotionally unavailable people, as if these were weather patterns assigned to them at birth by a cosmic meteorologist. They aren't weather patterns. They are programming. And the wonderful, breathtaking news is this: code can be rewritten. Throughout this journey, we are going to walk through the corridors of this invisible mental prison together. We won't be doing it with academic lectures, dry psychological jargon, or finger-wagging advice. We will do it with humor, deep psychological insight, neuroscience, philosophy, and practical wisdom. We are going to shine a flashlight into the dark corners of your mind where these hidden beliefs live, watch them squirm in the light, and gently dismantle them piece by piece. You are going to laugh out loud because you will suddenly recognize yourself in these stories. You are going to feel a profound sense of validation, realizing that your self-sabotage, your fears, and your repeated patterns are not character flaws, they are simply the logical result of an outdated operating system running in the background of your life. Above all, you are going to discover that awareness is the key, choice is the door, and lasting freedom begins the moment you realize the door was never locked from the outside. Take a deep breath. Get comfortable. Your journey out of the invisible prison starts right now. Chapter Summary. Most people spend their lives trying to change their external circumstances while remaining trapped by invisible internal beliefs. The human mind operates like a movie projector. Changing the outer reality requires updating the subconscious programming inside. Unconscious mental conditioning is shaped by childhood, society, culture, and past emotional pain. Limitations that feel like fixed personality traits or permanent weather patterns are actually just unquestioned mental scripts. Recognizing these invisible walls through Chapter 1, The Invisible Walls You Never Built. Have you ever noticed how human beings can spend 3 hours meticulously researching the absolute best ergonomic desk chair on the internet, comparing lumbar support angles, mesh breathability, and color swatches, only to spend the next 5 years sitting on a metaphorical emotional cactus while wondering why their back hurts? We are absolute masters of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic of our daily lives, convincing ourselves that if we just buy a better planner, download a newer app, or find a more aesthetically pleasing water bottle, our entire existence will magically transform. Then Monday morning arrives, and we find ourselves scrolling through our phones for 45 minutes straight, staring intensely at a notification that while actively avoiding the one phone call or task that would actually move our lives forward. We look up, realize the morning has vanished into the digital ether, and tell ourselves with a straight face, well, the lighting in here just wasn't conducive to deep work today. Human beings are brilliantly creative architects of self-deception. We can construct elaborate rationalizations for our habits with the speed and precision of an Olympic athlete. Yet, ask most people why they freeze up every time they think about pitching their creative work, why they automatically assume people are judging them at a social gathering, or why they tolerate professional treatment that resembles a medieval dungeon, and you will be met with a blank stare or a deeply confident, "That's just how I am." As if personality was a tattoo engraved at the factory before shipping. Here is the quiet, disorienting truth we need to face together: the walls keeping you stuck were never built by you as an adult. They were constructed out of bricks handed to you by someone else long before you even knew what building a life entailed. Let's look at how this actually works in the laboratory of everyday existence. Imagine walking into a hardware store. You wouldn't buy a door frame designed for a miniature dollhouse and try to wedge it onto a full-sized entryway, wondering why nothing fits and the roof is sagging. Yet, every single day, adults try to live their massive, beautiful, expansive lives through the cramped, miniature door frames of beliefs they adopted when they were 7 years old. Think back. When you were a child, your mind was not a critical analytical machine, it was an open sponge. It recorded everything. If you raised your hand in class with absolute enthusiasm, got a math problem wrong, and the room giggled, your nervous system didn't take notes like a detached scientist. It didn't write, yes, a minor statistical anomaly in third-grade arithmetic. Instead, your nervous system dropped anchor and flashed a neon sign across your brain that read, danger. Exposing yourself leads to public humiliation. Stay small. Stay quiet. Fast forward 25 years. You are sitting in a corporate boardroom or a creative team meeting. Your boss asks for innovative ideas. A brilliant, game-changing concept flashes across your mind. Your heart rate spikes. Your palms turn into tropical rainforests. And what does your adult mouth say? I don't know, maybe we could just update the font on the cover page. You walk out of the meeting feeling a quiet, heavy wave of self-disgust, wondering why you always hold back. You beat yourself up, calling yourself timid, lazy, or lacking ambition. But you aren't lacking ambition. Your 7-year-old self is currently driving the car while you are locked in the trunk, screaming directions through the floorboards. The wall telling you to stay quiet wasn't built by your current choices. It was an invisible brick wall installed by an 8-year-old protection mechanism that outlived its lease by about 2 decades. Neuroscience reveals something fascinating here. Our brains are prediction machines designed for survival, not necessarily for happiness or expansion. The neural pathways you fire repeatedly become your default superhighways. If your early environment taught you that love was conditional, that money was always scarce and stressful, or that expressing big dreams led to being mocked or reined in, your brain dutifully carved out neural tracks to keep you safe from those exact dangers. The tragedy, and the comedy of human life is that our brains treat unfamiliar growth with the exact same biological panic response they treat a charging predator. This is why deciding to change your life feels physically terrifying. When you try to step outside your comfort zone, your amygdala, the brain's emotional smoke detector, doesn't say, "Oh, look, she's trying to start a business, how exciting." No, your amygdala screams, "Emergency. She is wearing a new shirt and talking about abandoning our tribe." Sound the alarm. Deploy the procrastination. And instantly, your brain provides you with a deeply urgent, completely fabricated crisis that requires your immediate attention. Suddenly, right as you sit down to write your book or work on your goals, you realize that your kitchen junk drawer, the one that has remained undisturbed since the Obama administration, absolutely, critically needs to be color-coded and organized by paperclip size right this second. You find yourself elbow-deep in old takeout menus from 2018, feeling extremely productive while your dreams quietly collect dust in the corner. You didn't choose that distraction. Your invisible mental programming chose it for you to keep you safely inside the familiar cage. Philosophers across the ages have pointed out that most people sleepwalk through their existence, acting out scripts written by their culture, their families, and their past traumas while proudly declaring themselves the authors of their own destiny. We buy into cultural stories that tell us safety equals staying invisible, that abundance is reserved for other kinds of people, and that our worth is directly tied to how many items we can cross off a to-do list before collapsing from exhaustion. These aren't laws of physics. They are invisible walls. And the moment you shine a light on them, you realize something extraordinary: they have no structural integrity. They are made entirely of unquestioned assumptions. Take a moment to look around the mental room you've been living in. What are the rules you follow every single day without ever asking who wrote them? What are the boundaries you respect that nobody actually enforced? What are the dreams you dismissed as unrealistic simply because nobody in your immediate vicinity ever dared to chase them? You didn't build those walls. But you are the only one holding the key to walk right through them. Chapter Summary. Human beings frequently mistake coping mechanisms and early protective habits for fixed personality traits. Unconscious mental walls are often constructed during childhood or past emotional events to avoid pain, rejection, or failure. The brain's survival machinery treats unfamiliar growth and expansion as a biological emergency, triggering procrastination and distraction. Cultural scripts and family conditioning dictate silent rules about money, safety, and worth that operate completely below conscious awareness. Recognizing that these limitations are merely outdated programming, not laws of physics, is the fact. Chapter 2, Who taught you to think like this? Have you ever caught yourself saying a sentence out loud, freezing halfway through, and suddenly realizing you sounded exactly like your mother when you were 12? Or better yet, realizing you sounded like your middle school gym teacher who possessed the emotional warmth of a wet cardboard box. You stop mid-sentence, blink, and think, good grief, when did I rent out mouth space to people who gave me a complex about my posture? Human beings are walking, talking about museum exhibits of everyone who ever corrected us, criticized us, praised us conditionally, or rolled their eyes at us when we were too loud, too weird, or too ambitious. We walk around believing our inner monologue is a pristine, objective broadcast direct from headquarters, when in reality, it sounds more like a crowded boardroom meeting where everyone is shouting advice based on experiences they had in 1994. Let's investigate how this mental architecture gets installed in the first place, with zero judgment and plenty of humor. Imagine growing up in a house where money was treated not as a tool or a neutral resource, but as an erratic, terrifying houseguest who might leave at any moment and take the electricity with them. Every time financial topics came up, adults spoke in hushed, apocalyptic tones. Sentences floated through the air like toxic fog. Money doesn't grow on trees. Who do you think we are, Rockefellers, or rich people are just dishonest? As a child observing this, your brilliant little developing brain draws a very clear, highly protective conclusion: money causes stress. Wanting money makes me greedy. If I have too much of it, people I love will suffer or judge me. Fast forward 20 years. You are now an adult trying to build a business, negotiate a salary, or price your creative services. You sit down to send an email quoting your rates, and suddenly, your chest tightens. Your fingers freeze over the keyboard. A voice whispers in your ear, a voice that sounds suspiciously like your stressed-out uncle at a family dinner 20 years ago, telling you that if you charge what you are actually worth, nobody will hire you and you will end up destitute. So, what do? You slash your prices in half, throw in free revisions, and offer emotional support counseling with every purchase just to feel safe. Then you spend the evening exhausted and resentful, wondering why financial abundance feels like trying to run underwater wearing concrete boots. You didn't inherit a lack of talent or a natural aversion to wealth. You inherited a script. You downloaded someone else's software package onto your hard drive, and now you are wondering why your computer keeps crashing when you try to open files labeled success or expansion. Psychologists call this process introjection, the silent, uncritical adoption of the beliefs, standards, and emotional patterns of the people around us. When we are young, we don't have the cognitive filters to look at our parents, teachers, or culture and say, that belief system is completely dysfunctional, I think I'll pass. Instead, we swallow it whole because connection and survival depend on belonging to the tribe. If your family equated safety with keeping your head down, your young nervous system locked that lesson in a vault labeled absolute truth. Consider another classic everyday trap. Have you ever stayed in a relationship or a job long after its expiration date because of a quiet, nagging belief that you have to suffer to earn your place? Where did that come from? Did you find it etched into an ancient stone tablet? No. You absorbed it from a culture that glorifies burnout like an Olympic sport, treating exhaustion as moral validation and rest as a lazy character flaw. We tell ourselves we are being responsible or loyal, when we are actually just acting out a loyalty oath to an invisible prison guard who punched our ticket decades ago. Humor is often the fastest way to expose this absurdity. Think about how much energy we waste trying to impress people whose opinions we wouldn't even value if they handed them to us in writing. If a stranger walked up to you on the street and told you that your shoes were the wrong color, you would likely laugh and walk away, recognizing that they clearly have personal issues to sort out. Yet, let an internalized voice, born from a stray comment made by a critical aunt or a sarcastic classmate in 8th grade, whisper that you aren't ready to launch your dream project, and we treat it like divine revelation. We cancel our plans, shut down our laptops, and spend the evening eating ice cream out of the carton while binge-watching shows about people renovating houses in the countryside, as if their floor plans could somehow fix our internal architecture. It is genuinely hilarious when you zoom out. We are running billion-dollar human bodies, equipped with extraordinary neuroplasticity and creative potential, yet we regularly allow a random comment made by someone who wore frosted tips in 2003 to dictate whether we pursue our calling. Philosophy reminds us that freedom begins the moment you separate what you are from what you were taught to believe about who you are. You are not your conditioning. Your conditioning is just the dust that settled on your furniture while you weren't paying attention. Take a moment to look at the beliefs currently running your professional life, your self-worth, and your relationships. Whose voice is that really? When you hesitate, who are you afraid of disappointing? When you shrink back, whose invisible rulebook are you following? Once you realize that most of your mental limitations belong to someone else, handing them back to their original owners becomes not only possible, but profoundly satisfying. Practical reflection. Trace the origin. Think of one recurring fear or limitation that holds you back, e.g., fear of visibility, guilt around money, perfectionism. Finish this sentence honestly. I first learned that this was dangerous or unacceptable when. Identify the voice. When your inner critic tells you that you aren't ready, smart, or deserving enough, pause and ask, who does this voice actually sound like? Name the person, teacher, or cultural message it originated from. Return to sender. Imagine packaging that belief up like a misdelivered piece of mail, writing, "Return to sender," across the front, and leaving it on the doorstep of the person who handed it to you. Notice how much lighter your hands feel immediately after. Chapter Summary. Unconscious beliefs are often introject, silently swallowed whole from parents, teachers, and culture during childhood when critical thinking filters were offline. Financial fears, relationship patterns, and professional boundaries are frequently inherited scripts rather than objective personal truths. Human beings routinely surrender their adult agency to the internalized opinions of people whose authority they would never consciously endorse today. Society normalizes burnout and struggle, installing invisible rules that treat exhaustion as moral validation and rest as guilt. Recognizing that your inner critic is often just a tape recording of someone else's anxieties allows you to finally return ownership of those limitations. Chapter 3, The Stories Running Your Life Behind the Scenes. Have you ever caught yourself telling the exact same personal story at every dinner party, family gathering, or networking event, treating it as an immutable historical fact, while completely ignoring the fact that you have polished the punchline into a cinematic masterpiece that bears about as much resemblance to reality as a superhero movie? We all do it. We carry around a mental highlight reel, or more accurately, a lowlight reel, of our greatest failures, awkward moments, and embarrassing romantic misadventures. We play these clips on an endless loop inside our minds, complete with surround sound, color correction, and dramatic voiceover narration. Ah yes, we tell ourselves, watching the mental rerun for the 4,000th time, that is the exact moment my life took a permanent detour into mediocrity. Human beings are storytelling creatures. We don't just experience life, we narrate it in real time. But here is the catch that almost nobody talks about: once you tell a story about yourself enough times, your brain stops treating it as a memory and starts treating it as a prison blueprint. Let's look at how this plays out in everyday life with zero drama and a healthy dose of humor. Imagine waking up with a brilliant idea for a creative project, a business venture, or a bold life change. You feel a sudden surge of authentic enthusiasm. Your energy is high, your coffee is hot, and for 3 glorious minutes, you feel unstoppable. Then, right on cue, the internal narrator steps up to the microphone, clears its throat, and says, "Oh, honey. That's adorable. Remember what happened in 2018 when you tried to start that blog and nobody read it except your mom and a confused bot from Eastern Europe? Let's not embarrass ourselves in front of the entire internet again, shall we?" And just like that, the enthusiasm evaporates faster than a puddle on a hot sidewalk. You close your laptop, sink back into the couch, and sigh, telling yourself you are just being realistic and mature. You aren't being realistic. You are being held hostage by a ghost story. Psychologists point out that the human brain relies on narrative coherence to make sense of a chaotic world. To save energy, your brain loves shortcuts. If it can neatly categorize you as the person who always gets rejected, the one who never quite finishes what they start, or someone who is terrible with finances, it doesn't have to evaluate every new situation from scratch. It simply slaps a pre-printed barcode on your forehead, files you away in a mental filing cabinet, and saves processing power for more urgent survival tasks, like wondering what to make for dinner. The comedy of this is that we will fight tooth and nail to defend our personal limitations as if someone were trying to steal our most prized possessions. Have you ever tried to gently point out to a friend that maybe they aren't cursed in dating, but perhaps they just keep choosing people whose emotional availability resembles an abandoned amusement park? They look at you as if you have suggested leaping out of an airplane without a parachute. No, you don't understand, they insist, passionately defending their own cage. It's just my luck. Men are trash, romance is dead, and the universe has a personal vendetta against my happiness. We invest enormous amounts of creative energy into proving that we are broken, stuck, or incapable, because being stuck paradoxically feels safer than stepping into the wide open, terrifying arena of personal accountability and potential greatness. After all, if you are stuck due to bad luck or a tragic backstory, you don't have to take any risks. You get to sit back, cross your arms, and wait for the universe to apologize and fix it for you. Spoiler alert, the universe is terrible at paperwork and rarely sends apologies in the mail. Neuroscience shows us that neuroplasticity works both ways. The neural pathways of our habitual self-narratives get deeper and wider every time we repeat the story. If you tell yourself every day that you lack confidence, your brain dutifully prunes away connections that support boldness and reinforces the neural tracks associated with hesitation. You literally wire your biology to match your biography. Philosophy reminds us that you are not the narrator, you are the one listening to the narrator. There is a vast, quiet observer sitting behind your thoughts, watching the stories float by like clouds across a vast summer sky. When you realize that your internal monologue is just an automated storyteller recycling old scripts from past seasons of your life, you stop taking its dramatic outbursts so seriously. Take a look at the stories you tell about yourself when you introduce yourself to new people, when you think about your career, or when you look in the mirror. Which of those stories are serving as a launch pad, and which ones are serving as an electric fence? You didn't write the first draft of these stories when you were too young to know any better. But you are holding the pen right now. And nothing is stopping you from writing a brand new plot twist starting today. Practical reflection. Spot the broken record, identify one negative sentence you repeat about yourself regularly, e.g., I always mess things up when things start going well, or I'm just terrible at managing money. Write it down on a piece of paper. Interrogate the author. Ask yourself, when was the very first time I remember telling this story? Who was there? What was the actual event, stripped of all the dramatic commentary? Rewrite the script, take that exact story and rewrite it from the perspective of an objective, loving, highly amused mentor who sees your past not as a permanent label, but as training data for your inevitable breakthrough. Chapter Summary. Human beings rely on personal narratives to make sense of life, but repeated stories often calcify into mental prisons. The brain relies on familiar self-labels as cognitive shortcuts to avoid the energy cost of evaluating new possibilities. People frequently defend their limitations passionately because staying stuck due to circumstances feels safer than taking the risk of personal growth. Neuroplasticity reinforces whichever self-narrative is repeated most frequently, wiring biology to match biography. Recognizing that you are the observer of your thoughts, not the automated storyteller running the show, allows. Chapter 4, Your brain loves familiar, even when familiar hurts. Have you ever stayed in a job, a living situation, or a relationship long past its expiration date, watching every single warning sign flash bright neon red, while telling yourself, well, at least I know what to expect here, as if emotional predictability was a valid substitute for joy? Human beings possess an almost miraculous capacity for tolerating misery simply because it wears a familiar outfit. We would rather swim in a warm, comfortable swamp of dysfunction that we have known for 10 years than step out onto the unfamiliar, shivering shore of a brand new beginning. Consider a classic everyday moment. You decide to finally clean out your closet. You pull out a sweater that you haven't worn since 2017, a hideous, scratchy garment that makes you look like a disheveled owl and smells faintly of mothballs and regret. As you hold it up, preparing to throw it in the donation bin, a strange wave of sentimental panic washes over you. Wait, your brain screams. Remember that Tuesday afternoon in October when you wore this while eating lukewarm soup? What if you never find another scratchy acrylic turtleneck quite like it? What if letting this go means you are losing a piece of your history? So, what do? You fold it up with deep reverence and place it right back into the darkness of the drawer, where it will safely hibernate for another 5 years while you complain that you have nothing to wear. We do this with our lives on a grand scale. We cling to familiar stress, familiar anxiety, and familiar heartbreak because the human brain is, above all else, an efficient survival machine. And to your brain's ancient operating system, familiar equals survived. Think about that for a moment. Your nervous system does not evaluate your choices based on whether they make you happy, fulfilled, or expansive. It evaluates them based on a single, primitive metric: did we die doing this last time? If the answer is no, even if you were miserable, broke, stressed, or emotionally neglected, your brain checks the box, labels that state of being as safe, and fights tooth and nail to keep you right there. This explains why breaking old patterns feels so biologically disorienting. When you finally decide to walk away from a toxic dynamic, set a firm boundary, or pursue a bold new goal, your body doesn't throw a party and release confetti. Instead, your nervous system throws an absolute tantrum. Your heart races, your stomach twists in knots, and an overwhelming wave of anxiety tells you that you've made a terrible mistake. Your brain experiences genuine growth and positive change as a threat to its equilibrium. It whispers urgent, persuasive lies into your ear, go back. It was bad, but at least we knew the rules. This new freedom is dangerous and unpredictable. And so, like homing pigeons returning to a cage with a broken door, we retreat right back into our old habits, sighing with relief as the familiar chains click back into place. Ah, we think, settling back into our misery. At least I'm back in my comfort zone. Except it isn't a comfort zone at all. It is a panic room upholstered in wallpaper from the 1990s. Psychologists note that familiarity creates a cognitive illusion of control. Even when a situation is painful, the fact that you know its rhythm gives you a false sense of mastery. You know when the shoe is going to drop. You know how to brace for impact. Stepping into the unknown means surrendering that control, and to an unexamined mind, the unknown looks terrifyingly like danger. Philosophy and neuroscience intersect beautifully here. Freedom requires teaching your nervous system that peace is not a trap. It requires realizing that just because an emotional state feels uncomfortable or foreign does not mean it is unsafe. In fact, if your life has been built around chronic stress, overfunctioning, or self-sabotage, peace will feel foreign at first. It will feel quiet, unnerving, and almost suspicious. You will keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, looking around corners for a crisis because your cells are addicted to the biochemical cocktail of adrenaline and cortisol. Breaking out of the invisible prison means recognizing this biological quirk for what it is. When your brain screams at you to retreat into the familiar misery, you don't need to panic. You just need to pat your nervous system on the head, thank it for trying to keep you safe from saber-toothed tigers, and calmly step forward anyway. The unknown isn't an abyss waiting to swallow you whole. It is a blank canvas. And the only thing keeping you attached to the old canvas is the terrifying, beautiful realization that you are finally allowed to paint something entirely new. Chapter Summary. The human brain prioritizes familiarity over happiness because its primary evolutionary directive is survival, not fulfillment. Unconscious conditioning leads people to cling to dysfunctional habits, toxic relationships, and familiar stress simply because they know what to expect. True personal growth and positive change trigger an immediate panic response from the nervous system, which mistakes unfamiliar peace for a threat. Misery often masquerades as a comfort zone, because the predictability of pain provides a false illusion of control over the unknown. Overcoming the invisible prison requires retraining your nervous system to accept peace, quiet, and expand. Chapter 5: Why you keep proving yourself right. Have you ever meticulously planned out a project, a social gathering, or a career move, convinced down to your bones that it was going to be an absolute disaster from start to finish, and then watched with grim, exhausted satisfaction as every single thing you predicted actually came true? You sit back, rub your temples, and sigh to yourself, I knew it. I am always right. As if you possessed a rare psychic ability to gaze into the murky crystal ball of future misery, rather than the much more mundane reality that you built a self-fulfilling prophecy and then greased the tracks to make sure the train stayed on schedule. Human beings are world-class forensic scientists when it comes to gathering evidence that supports our deepest insecurities, while simultaneously being legally blind to anything that contradicts them. If your internal operating system believes that people are inherently unreliable, your brain turns into an elite surveillance unit scouring every room you enter for proof. Let's look at how this plays out in everyday life without taking ourselves too seriously. Imagine you go to a social event with a quiet, lingering belief that nobody really cares what you have to say. You walk into the room, stand near the snack table, and cross your arms defensively while staring intently at a bowl of dip like it holds the secrets of the universe. A friendly person walks over, smiles, and says, "Hi. How's your evening going?" Because your confirmation bias is running hot, your brain immediately scans their tone for micro-expressions of boredom. You notice them blink twice and glance toward the hallway. Boom. Case closed. Your internal narrative screams, "See. They are clearly trapped, annoyed by my presence, and looking for an emergency exit." You offer a stiff, one-word answer and turn back to your relationship with the dip. The other person, feeling politely rebuffed, excuses themselves to get a drink. And you walk away from the interaction shaking your head, muttering, "Unbelievable. People are so cold and unfriendly these days." You didn't experience reality. You experienced a closed-loop feedback system of your own design. You fired a warning shot, ducked for cover, and then complained that nobody wanted to play catch. Psychologists call this confirmation bias paired with behavioral confirmation. We don't just look for evidence that confirms our beliefs, we unconsciously act in ways that force other people to react in ways that prove us right. If you believe your partner is going to pull away, you become hypervigilant, anxious, and needy. Your hypervigilance creates tension in the air. Your tension makes your partner slightly uncomfortable and distant. And your brain instantly flashes the neon sign, "Aha! I told you they were pulling away." You have successfully engineered the exact disaster you were afraid of, simply so you could experience the twisted comfort of saying, "I knew it." Think about how exhausting this is. We spend an enormous amount of precious life energy running a mental courtroom where we act as the defense attorney, the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury against our own potential. We drag ourselves to the stand every single day and argue passionately for our own limitations. Your Honor, I present Exhibit A, that awkward presentation in the 11th grade where my voice cracked while reading a poem about daffodils. Therefore, my client should never, under any circumstances, speak up in a public meeting ever again. And the judge, which is just your automated subconscious conditioning, bangs the gavel and rules in favor of lifetime mediocrity. Neuroscience sheds incredible light on why our brains are wired this way. The human brain processes millions of bits of sensory information every second, but our conscious awareness can only handle a tiny fraction of that data. To keep us from short-circuiting, the brain relies on a neural filter called the reticular activating system, RAS. Think of your RAS as an internal Google search bar programmed by your deepest beliefs. If you type the search term, "I am incompetent and people always find out," your brain's search engine will scour the environment all day long, pulling up every minor typo, every awkward pause, and every delayed text message as top-tier search results, while completely ignoring the compliments, successes, and moments of brilliance happening right in front of your face. You aren't seeing reality as it is. You are seeing reality as your search bar is programmed to find it. Philosophy and self-mastery teach us that the ultimate mental jailbreak is learning to change your search terms. What happens if you delete the old, toxic query from your mental search bar and replace it with something expansive? What if, instead of asking, "How is this going to humiliate me?" you start asking, "Where is the hidden opportunity here?" Or, "What if things actually work out brilliantly for once?" At first, your brain will reject the new search term like an organ transplant being pushed out by the immune system. It will feel fake, awkward, and overly optimistic. Your inner critic will tap you on the shoulder and whisper, "Who do you think you are kidding?" You just smile at the critic, leave the search bar open, and watch how quickly the world changes when you stop forcing it to prove you wrong. Chapter Summary. Human beings use confirmation bias and the brain's filtering system to aggressively hunt for evidence that supports their insecurities. Unconscious beliefs often lead people to act in ways that force others to react defensively, creating self-fulfilling prophecies. The brain's reticular activating system acts as an internal search engine, highlighting data that matches our internal programming while ignoring contrary evidence. Spending life trying to prove limitations right is an exhausting mental courtroom drama where the subconscious acts as both prosecutor and judge. Breaking free requires deliberately updating your mental search terms and learning to look for. Chapter 6, Fear's Favorite Disguise, Common Sense. Have you ever looked at a bold, beautiful, life-expanding dream, like starting a creative business, taking a leap into a new career, or finally speaking your truth to someone who treats you like furniture, and decided not to do it because you were being responsible? You sat there nodding sagely, telling yourself and everyone around you that you were just exercising common sense, being realistic, and exercising mature caution. You even used the word prudent. Grown adults love the word prudent. It sounds so dignified, like wearing a tweed jacket while sipping tea by a fireplace. Except, 9 times out of 10, common sense is just fear wearing a tailored suit and a sensible pair of shoes. Let's investigate this with zero judgment and a healthy dose of everyday humor. Imagine you have a burning desire to write a book, launch a podcast, or completely reinvent your professional path. Your soul is lit up. Your creative engine is roaring. But the moment you actually sit down to map out the first step, fear walks into the room disguised as a clipboard-wielding accountant. Fear doesn't kick down the door screaming like a monster in a horror movie. That would be too obvious. Instead, fear clears its throat politely and says, "Now, let's be sensible. The market is saturated. The economy is unpredictable. What if people think your ideas are silly? You should probably spend another 6 months researching market trends, organizing your desk supplies, and waiting for the planets to align in a more fiscally responsible formation." And you nod along, thinking, "Ah, what a wise, rational thought. I am simply being prudent." You have just been scammed by your own nervous system. Psychologists point out that the human brain hates uncertainty far more than it hates misery. When you stand at the edge of something genuinely new, your brain doesn't know what comes next. That lack of predictability triggers an alarm bell in your amygdala. But because you are a civilized, intelligent adult, your brain knows that running down the street screaming, "We're going to die," won't fly in polite society. So, your mind does something brilliant. It takes raw, unadulterated terror, runs it through a sophisticated corporate shredder, and spits it out as practicality. Think about how sneaky this disguise really is. We call procrastination thorough preparation. We call chronic self-doubt attention to detail. We call a complete refusal to take a risk being realistic. We wear our hesitation like a badge of honor, proudly announcing to our friends, "I'm just a very cautious person," as if caution was an Olympic sport and not a clever hiding spot for our unhealed fears. Humorously enough, we can spot this instantly in other people. Have you ever watched a friend invent 24 logistical reasons why they can't possibly leave a dead-end job or ask someone out on a date, while you can clearly see from across the table that they are just terrified of rejection? You want to shake them gently by the shoulders and say, "My friend, you are not doing a risk assessment analysis, you are hiding under your emotional blankie." Yet, when we put on the blanket, we are completely convinced it is bulletproof armor. Neuroscience explains that our brains are hardwired to minimize energy expenditure and social exposure. Back in our evolutionary history, standing out from the tribe, taking a massive gamble, or trying something entirely unprecedented could literally get you banished into the wilderness to be snacked upon by local wildlife. Your modern brain has inherited that exact same survival software. When you think about stepping out of the invisible prison, your nervous system interprets that expansion as getting kicked out of the tribe. To save your life, it generates a list of logical reasons why staying right where you are, miserable, stuck, but technically alive, is the most brilliant choice you could possibly make. Philosophy reminds us that a ship is safe in harbor, but that is not what ships were built for. When we spend our entire lives hiding behind the illusion of common sense, we trade the vibrant, messy, unpredictable magic of a life fully lived for the dull, gray safety of a cell with very clean floors. Take a look at the areas in your life where you feel stuck right now. Are you truly being practical, or are you just letting fear rent out space in your rational mind and dictate your boundaries? When you strip away the polished excuses, the well-researched hesitations, and the respectable terminology of doubt, you are left with a simple choice. Do you want to spend your life managing your fears, or do you want to step past them and discover what you are actually capable of? Chapter Summary. Fear frequently masquerades as common sense, prudence, and being realistic to keep individuals from taking risks. The human brain hates uncertainty and translates raw survival terror into polished, socially acceptable excuses for hesitation. Procrastination, over-researching, and chronic doubt are often disguised as thorough preparation and attention to detail. Evolutionary wiring mistakes bold personal growth and visibility for social banishment, triggering protective mental blockades. Examining your hesitations. Chapter 7, The Identity You Never Chose. Have you ever looked in the mirror, caught your own reflection, and experienced a sudden, bizarre flash of estrangement, as if you are a completely normal soul who somehow accidentally wandered into someone else's life costume, put on their clothes, drove their car to a job you never really wanted, and now you are just awkwardly trying to wing it until someone figures out you don't belong here. Most people go through life assuming their identity is a solid, permanent sculpture carved out of granite. They believe, this is just who I am. I'm an anxious person, I'm bad with money, I'm socially awkward, I don't handle change well, and I certainly am the kind of person who achieves massive goals. We treat these self-descriptions as biological facts, like eye color or shoe size. Except, your identity is not a permanent monument. It is a wardrobe you tried on years ago because it was handed to you by your environment, and now you have grown 3 sizes too large for it, yet you keep wearing it while complaining that your shoulders hurt. Let's look at how this identity gets stitched together in the real world with zero judgment and a touch of warmth. Imagine growing up in a household or a school environment where you were quietly assigned a specific role. Maybe you were labeled the responsible one because your younger sibling needed constant attention. Maybe you were labeled the quiet one because you preferred reading a book to shouting across a crowded playground. Maybe you were labeled the sensitive one because tears welled up easily when people were harsh. As a child, you take that label and glue it directly onto your sense of self. You think, I am the responsible one. Therefore, I must carry everyone else's emotional baggage, never make a mistake, and always be the reliable adult in the room, even when I am exhausted. Fast forward 20 years. You are an adult drowning in obligations, resenting everyone around you because they take your endless help for granted, yet you are terrified to set a boundary. Why? Because a tiny, terrified voice in the back of your mind whispers, if I stop carrying everything, who am I? If I am not the responsible, helpful one, will anyone still love me? You are protecting an identity you never consciously chose in the first place. You are acting out a character written by an 8-year-old version of yourself who was just trying to figure out how to survive and secure love within a specific family or social ecosystem. The comedy of this is how fiercely we defend these arbitrary roles. Have you ever tried to gently encourage a friend who plays the eternal martyr or perpetual victim in every social circle to try a different approach? They look at you as if you've suggested trading their limbs for spaghetti noodles. You don't understand, they declare. People always take advantage of me. I'm just too nice. They are guarding their cage with the intensity of a medieval knight protecting a sacred relic, completely unaware that the lock has been rusted open for a decade. They are deeply attached to the story of who they are, because letting go of the old identity means stepping into a terrifying void where nobody knows your name and you have to invent yourself from scratch. Psychologists note that the ego loves consistency far more than it loves happiness. Your ego, that construct of thoughts, labels, and habits, will actively sabotage your success, your finances, and your relationships just to protect its own internal narrative. If your identity is built around being the underdog who struggles, your subconscious will torpedo a wonderful financial opportunity or a healthy relationship because maintaining the struggle is the only way the ego knows how to keep its bearings. If you aren't struggling, who are you? Neuroscience shows us that our self-identity is maintained by neural networks that fire in predictable loops. When you identify as someone who always gets nervous speaking up or someone who could never run a business, your brain activates those exact pathways whenever a relevant situation arises, reinforcing the illusion of a fixed self. Philosophy reminds us of a liberating truth: you are not the clothes you are wearing, and you are not the character you have been playing. You are the infinite, conscious awareness observing the costume. When you realize that your identity is nothing more than a collection of habits, beliefs, and assigned roles that you have outgrown, a profound sense of lightness takes over. You stop asking, is this who I am, and start asking, who do I actually choose to become next? The invisible prison door isn't locked by your past identity. It swings open the moment you realize you are allowed to walk out of the fitting room and put on something that actually fits your soul. Chapter Summary. People often mistake temporary roles and assign childhood labels for permanent, unchangeable personality traits. The ego fiercely protects its internal narrative, sometimes sabotaging success or happiness just to maintain consistency with its familiar identity. Unconscious conditioning leads individuals to cling to restrictive self-images, such as the martyr, the underdog, or the quiet one, out of fear of the unknown void of reinvention. Neural pathways reinforce fixed self-identities through repetitive mental loops and habitual behavior patterns. Lasting freedom begins when you recognize that your identity is a wardrobe you can change at any time, choosing conscious reinvention. Chapter 8, The Voice Inside Your Head Isn't Always Yours. Have you ever been sitting in complete silence, minding your own business, when suddenly a voice pops up out of nowhere to announce, "Well, that was completely stupid. Why did you say that? Everyone is definitely going to remember it and talk about you at breakfast tomorrow." You blink, look around an empty room, and wonder, whose brilliant broadcast was that? We live our lives under the spell of a major cultural illusion. The automatic assumption that every thought echoing inside our skulls is a certified, stamped, 100% authentic product of our own conscious free will. We assume that if we think about it, we must own it. If the voice tells us we are failing, we feel like failures. If the voice tells us we are awkward, we shrink back. If the voice tells us we aren't ready for a breakthrough, we put our dreams back on the shelf. Let's look at this with zero drama and a healthy dose of everyday humor. Imagine walking into a movie theater, sitting down in the dark, and suddenly hearing a random person in the row behind you loudly critiquing your choice of jacket, your posture, and your life choices. You would turn around, highly annoyed, and say, "Excuse me? Who put you in charge of the commentary?" Yet, when that exact same critical commentary comes from inside our own minds, we don't turn around and question it. We treat it like the Supreme Court of the universe. We nod sagely, absorb the insult, and spend the rest of the evening feeling miserable, as if our inner critic was an objective, unbiased angel of truth rather than an overcaffeinated parrot repeating insults it overheard 30 years ago. Let's trace where this internal narrator actually gets its material. Psychologists and neuroscientists remind us that the human brain functions like a biological recording device. From the time you were a tiny child, your mind recorded every sharp reprimand from a teacher, every anxious sigh from a stressed parent, every sarcastic comment from a schoolyard peer, and every cultural warning about what happens to people who stick their necks out too far. All of those audio clips didn't just evaporate into thin air. They were filed away in the neural archives. And now, whenever you try to step outside your comfort zone, your brain hits play on those old recordings to keep you safely paralyzed inside the familiar enclosure. The comedy of this is that our inner critic sounds so convincingly authoritative. It doesn't sound like your stressed out aunt or your 7th grade math teacher, it speaks in your own voice. It uses the first-person pronoun, "I'm just not cut out for this," or "I always mess things up." Because it uses your voice, you swallow it whole. It is the ultimate psychological ventriloquism act. Someone else is pulling the strings and operating the jaw, but because the dummy looks like you think the words are coming from your authentic core. Think about how much mental real estate we donate to this uninvited roommate. We wouldn't let a stranger off the street walk into our living house, put their muddy boots on the coffee table, and tell us we are inadequate. Yet, we let an automated loop of internalized conditioning do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without ever checking their credentials or asking for their identification. Philosophy points out the profound breakthrough that occurs the moment you shift your perspective from being the voice to being the listener of the voice. There is a vast, calm, observing presence behind your thoughts. A quiet awareness that watches the mental weather roll by without getting swept away by the storm. When a harsh, limiting thought pops up, you don't need to argue with it, fight it, or spiral into anxiety. You can simply look at it with warm, detached amusement, like a scientist observing a quirky specimen under a microscope. "Ah, look at that," you can tell yourself. "There goes that old tape from 1999 again. Fascinating how it still thinks it's relevant." The moment you separate your true identity from the automated background noise of your conditioning, the volume drops. The prison guard loses its microphone. And for the first time, you realize that peace is not the absence of all thoughts, it is simply the realization that you don't have to believe everything you hear in your own head. Chapter Summary. People often assume every thought inside their mind is an authentic product of their own conscious free will. The inner critic is frequently an automated recording of internalized criticisms from parents, teachers, peers, and culture. The critic uses the first-person pronoun, acting as psychological ventriloquism that tricks individuals into believing limiting thoughts are their own. True freedom begins by shifting from being identified with the thoughts to becoming the quiet observer watching them. Recognizing limiting thoughts as outdated background noise. Chapter 9, Escaping the Mental Cage. Have you ever watched a documentary about zoo animals, where an enclosure gate is left wide open during maintenance, yet the magnificent tiger or lion continues to pace back and forth inside the exact same imaginary boundaries, never once stepping out into the wide-open savanna? We watch that on television and shake our heads, thinking, how can they be so blind? The door is right there. Just walk through it. Then we close the laptop, sigh heavily, and walk back over to our desks to spend another 3 hours meticulously optimizing a spreadsheet for a job that drains our soul, while ignoring the creative project, the bold dream, or the healing conversation we have been putting off for the last decade. Human beings are world champions at pacing back and forth inside an invisible cage long after the imaginary lock has fallen off. Let's look at this with zero drama and a healthy dose of everyday humor. Imagine you have decided to finally break free from a limiting pattern, say, your tendency to say yes to every single request thrown your way until you are functioning on caffeine, dry toast, and sheer resentment. You read an inspiring article, listen to a brilliant podcast, and make a solemn vow, that's it. Starting today, I am setting boundaries. I am going to say no without apologizing, explaining myself, or offering to bake cupcakes as compensation. You feel invincible. You walk tall. You are a sovereign being of light and boundaries. Then, 30 minutes later, an acquaintance asks you to take on a ridiculous favor that requires you to spend your entire Saturday formatting documents for free. Your nervous system lights up like a pinball machine. Your chest tightens. The old programming kicks in instantly, flashing a neon emergency sign across your brain, danger. If you say no, they won't like you. They will think you are selfish. You will be cast out into the wilderness of social disapproval. And what does your mouth do? Your mouth smiles brightly and says, "Oh, I'd love to. Let me just rearrange my entire weekend plans and sacrifice my remaining sanity." You hang up the phone, sit down on the couch, and stare at the wall with a profound sense of self-disgust, wondering why your heroic intentions have the structural integrity of a wet paper towel. You aren't weak. You aren't broken. You are simply experiencing the friction of an old neural superhighway colliding with a brand new footpath. Psychologists and neuroscientists explain that breaking out of the invisible prison requires more than just a burst of motivation or a pep talk in the mirror. Motivation is an emotional sugar rush. It feels wonderful for about 20 minutes, and then it crashes, leaving you exhausted on the couch with an empty wrapper. True escape requires systematic rewiring. It requires understanding that the discomfort you feel when you step out of your cage is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is the biological proof that you are finally doing something right. Think about what happens when your muscles haven't been stretched in years. If you decide to take up yoga or go for a long walk, your muscles ache. You feel stiff, awkward, and uncomfortable. Do you sit on the floor and cry, shouting, "This stretch is toxic. My body hates movement. I must be broken"? No. You recognize that the soreness is simply lactic acid clearing out and muscle fibers lengthening. You expect discomfort. You breathe through it. Yet, when it comes to emotional and mental stretching, the moment we feel a twinge of anxiety, guilt, or unfamiliarity, we panic. We interpret the discomfort as a cosmic warning sign telling us to retreat back into our safe, miserable cage. Ouch, we say, feeling a tiny spike of guilt when we set a boundary. I guess I shouldn't have done that. Let me go back to accommodating everyone until I collapse. Humorously, we forget that freedom is an acquired taste. If you have spent your entire life eating processed sugar, raw kale will taste like despair the first time you try it. That doesn't mean kale is bad, it just means your palate has been hijacked by high-fructose corn syrup. Similarly, if your mind has been marinated in self-doubt, people-pleasing, and scarcity for decades, peace and sovereignty will feel weird at first. You will feel restless. You will feel guilty. You will keep looking around for a crisis because your nervous system is bored without the adrenaline rush of chronic stress. Philosophy reminds us that freedom is not a place you arrive at, it is a muscle you exercise. Every time you notice the invisible wall, name it, smile at it, and take one small step past it anyway, you weaken the programming. You lay down a fresh layer of neural asphalt. The cage door isn't locked. The bars are made of old habits, biological habits, and cultural scripts that dissolve the moment you stop feeding them your compliance. Take a deep breath. Look around the cage you've been pacing inside. Notice how flimsy the walls actually are when you stop leaning your weight against them. The savannah is right outside. And your feet are ready. Chapter summary. People often continue pacing inside invisible cages long after their limiting beliefs and protective mechanisms have lost their power. Motivation provides a temporary emotional surge, but lasting escape requires systematic rewiring rather than short-lived enthusiasm. Emotional discomfort, guilt, and anxiety experienced during personal growth are normal biological responses to expanding beyond familiar limits, not signs of failure. Unfamiliar peace and sovereignty often feel uncomfortable to a nervous system accustomed to chronic stress and people-pleasing. Exercising the freedom muscle, by taking small, courageous steps weakens old men. Chapter 10, Rewriting the Hidden Script. Have you ever tried to edit a document on a computer where the Track Changes feature was stuck on permanent aggressive mode, so that every single time you tried to delete a poorly phrased sentence, the machine flashed a dramatic warning box asking if you were absolutely sure you wanted to ruin the entire history of Western civilization? We treat our minds with that exact same level of defensive bureaucracy. When you decide to update your internal beliefs, your subconscious mind acts like an overzealous administrative assistant who refuses to throw away a single piece of junk mail from 1994. You try to replace an old, restrictive belief, like, I always have to struggle just to stay afloat, with something expansive, and your internal operating system throws a blue screen of death. Warning, new thought detected. This file conflicts with historical data stored during your 7th grade science fair. Abort. Abort. Let's look at how we actually rewrite this hidden script in everyday life with zero drama and plenty of warm humor. Imagine you have finally decided to stop participating in the cultural religion of burnout and exhaustion. You announce to yourself, from now on, I am allowed to rest without needing to earn it through absolute physical collapse. You leave your desk at a reasonable hour, close your laptop, and sit down on the couch to read a novel. For about 3 minutes, it feels lovely. Then, the invisible script kicks in. A cold sweat breaks out across your palms. Your shoulders tense up like coiled springs. An urgent, panicky voice echoes through your skull, what are you doing? The dishes are in the sink. Someone on the internet is probably being more productive than you right now. You are going to wake up tomorrow and find out your life has spontaneously unraveled because you read 30 pages of fiction instead of answering emails. You find yourself frantically pacing around the living room, feeling intensely guilty for engaging in the radical, scandalous act of relaxing. You didn't fail at resting. Your nervous system was simply experiencing the cognitive whiplash of running a brand new program on an old, outdated hard drive. Psychologists and neuroscientists explain that neuroplasticity, the brain's magnificent ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, doesn't happen by accident. It requires deliberate repetition and emotional safety. When you install new beliefs, you have to treat your mind like a gently stubborn toddler learning how to ride a bicycle. You don't scream at the toddler for wobbling, you hold the handlebars, offer encouragement, and expect a few scraped knees along the way. The comedy of human behavior is how impatient we are with ourselves. We expect that after reading a book, listening to an audio series, or having a brilliant epiphany on a Tuesday afternoon, our entire psychological operating system should instantly upgrade to a sleek, flawless version 10.0. Then, when we catch ourselves falling back into an old habit or repeating a familiar mental loop on Wednesday morning, we beat ourselves up. Ugh. I knew it. I'm broken. I'll never change. As if upgrading 30 years of mental conditioning was as simple as downloading a software patch over Wi-Fi while drinking morning coffee. Change is messy, beautiful, and delightfully awkward. When you begin rewriting your internal script, your old neural pathways don't just pack their bags and move out overnight. They scream for attention. They throw tantrums. They send up flares of anxiety, doubt, and familiarity. The secret is learning not to argue with the tantrums. When the old script starts playing, whispering that you aren't ready, that abundance is for other people, or that setting boundaries makes you a terrible person, you don't need to panic or dive headfirst into an existential crisis. You simply look at the thought, smile at its dramatic flair, and gently override it with the new truth. Thank you for sharing, old programming, you tell your mind. I see you are trying to keep us safe from imaginary tigers. But we are writing a new story now. Philosophy teaches us that we are both the author and the manuscript. Every time you consciously interrupt an old, limiting automatic reaction and replace it with a thought rooted in expansion, courage, and self-compassion, you are physically rewiring your brain. You are building a superhighway of freedom right through the middle of the old, overgrown jungle of conditioning. The ink is in your hand. What sentence are you going to write next? Chapter Summary. Rewriting internal programming triggers resistance from old neural pathways, which treat unfamiliar habits with biological panic and guilt. Attempting to rest, set boundaries, or step into abundance often causes temporary anxiety as the nervous system adjusts to new patterns. Lasting transformation requires patience and self-compassion, as upgrading deep-seated mental conditioning takes consistent repetition rather than instant fixes. Old limiting thoughts should be acknowledged with humor and calmly overwritten rather than fought with panic or self-judgment. Consciously replacing restrictive automatic reactions rewires brain circuitry. Chapter 11, Seeing Possibilities Instead of Prison Bars. Have you ever stood in front of a refrigerator packed to absolute capacity with leftovers, gourmet ingredients, snacks, and fresh produce, stared blankly into the cold light for 4 straight minutes, and then closed the door to announce with utter despair, "There is literally nothing to eat in this house"? We have all been there. Our eyes are physically functioning, our retinas are capturing the photons, and our brains are processing visual shapes, yet because our minds are locked into a specific craving or a narrow expectation, we become completely blind to the abundance sitting right in front of our noses. Human beings experience life through a psychological filter that edits reality down to what our conditioning expects to see. We walk through a world overflowing with opportunities, creative breakthroughs, supportive connections, and financial possibilities, yet we routinely declare that we are stuck in a dead-end landscape with zero options. Let's look at this with zero drama and a healthy dose of everyday humor. Imagine you are looking for your sunglasses. You check the entry table, look under the couch cushions, recheck the entry table, sigh heavily, and then call out to anyone in the house, "Has anyone seen my sunglasses?" They've completely vanished, while you are currently wearing them perched directly on top of your head like a pair of decorative antennae. Your family members look at you with a mixture of amusement and concern, pointing upward. You reach up, feel the frames, and experience that hilarious, humbling flash of realization, "Ah. They were right there the entire time. My search party was completely unnecessary." We do the exact same thing with our lives on a daily basis. We scan our professional environments, our relationships, and our personal potential through a narrow, fear-based lens that filters out everything except what matches our old programming. If your internal belief system whispers that you are trapped in a stagnant career, your brain automatically edits out every networking event, every creative side project, every skill acquisition opportunity, and every encouraging contact that floats past your radar. You walk right past open doors every single day, convincing yourself that the walls are solid concrete because that is what your invisible prison blueprint taught you to look for. Psychologists and neuroscientists explain that perception is an active creation, not a passive recording. Your brain filters out roughly 99% of incoming sensory data to prevent sensory overload, relying on your core beliefs to decide what deserves your conscious attention. If your core belief is rooted in lack, limitation, and restriction, your brain serves up a daily menu of scarcity, even when you are standing in the middle of an absolute feast of opportunity. The comedy of this is how passionately we defend our blindness. Have you ever tried to point out a wonderful opportunity to someone who is deeply committed to feeling stuck? You lay out a clear, practical, exciting path forward, and they immediately respond with a laundry list of reasons why it could never possibly work for them. "Oh, sure, that works for other people," they sigh, treating their limitation like a VIP membership card. "But my situation is different. My circumstances are uniquely impossible. They are guarding their blind spots with the ferocity of a dragon protecting gold, completely unaware that their impossible circumstances are simply the product of an unupdated filter. Philosophy reminds us that the world is not merely as it is, the world is as we are. When you clean the dirty window of your internal conditioning, the external landscape doesn't actually change, your ability to perceive its vastness does. What happens when you consciously decide to change your filter? What happens when you stop looking for proof that you are stuck and start scanning your days for hidden doors? Suddenly, conversations spark in unexpected places. Creative ideas arrive while you are washing dishes. Resources appear just as you need them. You realize that the prison walls were never guarding a real boundary, they were just optical illusions maintained by an old habit of looking backward instead of looking around. Take off the decorative sunglasses sitting on your forehead. Look around the room of your life right now. The door isn't locked, and the path isn't blocked. You just had to stop staring at the wall to see the open space waiting for you. Chapter Summary. Human perception is an active filter. Conditioning causes individuals to overlook abundance and opportunities that contradict their internal expectations. Fear-based mental filters edit out possibilities, making people feel trapped even when viable paths forward are directly in front of them. Individuals frequently defend their self-imposed limitations and impossible circumstances with the same passion others apply to success. Cleaning the internal window of conditioning transforms how the external world is perceived without requiring an immediate shift in physical reality. Shifting focus from scarcity to opportunity reveals that the barriers blocking progress are merely optical illusions born. Chapter 12, Freedom begins with one new belief. Have you ever watched someone try to assemble a piece of flat-pack furniture without reading the instructions, driven entirely by stubborn pride and a secret hope that they can somehow intuit the inner workings of Swedish engineering, only to end up with a structure that resembles a leaning tower of cardboard and 3 mysterious wooden pegs left over? They step back, look at the wobbling monstrosity, and proudly declare, "Well, it holds my coffee cup, so technically it's a masterpiece." We approach our personal transformation with that exact same DIY enthusiasm. We want massive life changes, deep emotional healing, and total financial freedom, yet we refuse to examine the foundational belief components holding the whole structure together. We try to force new habits on top of old, rotting foundations, wondering why our motivation collapses into a pile of sawdust by Wednesday afternoon. Let's look at how freedom actually begins with zero drama and a healthy dose of warm humor. Imagine standing in front of a massive, heavy wooden door that refuses to budge. You push against it with all your might. You throw your shoulder into it. You recruit your friends to help you heave against it. You sweat, you grunt, you complain about the weather, and you curse the architect who designed such an unreasonable barrier. Then, a child walks up, reaches out a finger, pushes a tiny latch on the side, and the door swings open effortlessly on greased hinges. You weren't lacking strength. You were just trying to force a door that was held shut by a tiny, invisible latch. In our lives, that tiny latch is a single, foundational belief. Most people think freedom requires an exhausting, Herculean effort, climbing mountains of self-discipline, fighting daily wars against laziness, and completely overhauling every single habit overnight. But true, lasting transformation doesn't work that way. It doesn't start with changing your entire external routine, it starts with identifying and replacing one single belief that is keeping the latch locked. Think about how this operates in everyday reality. If your core belief is, "I am fundamentally incapable of managing money successfully," no amount of budgeting apps, financial podcasts, or color-coded spreadsheets will save you. Every time you get a little ahead, your subconscious will panic, find a way to sabotage your progress, and drag you right back to your baseline of stress, because your actions must always align with your identity. However, the moment you drop that old belief and replace it with a single, empowering truth, such as, "I am fully capable of learning how money works and building sustainable abundance," the entire board flips. Suddenly, looking at a bank statement doesn't feel like opening a horror movie script. Suddenly, asking for what your work is worth feels natural rather than terrifying. You didn't have to change your entire personality, you just unhooked the latch. Psychologists and neuroscientists explain that belief is simply a thought you have practiced until it felt like a fact. When you introduce a new, empowering belief, your brain's neuroplasticity goes to work, building fresh neural connections around that new center of gravity. The comedy of human behavior is how much we resist adopting that one new belief because it feels fake at first. We say, well, I can't tell myself I'm confident when I still feel nervous. Of course you feel nervous. You spent 20 years practicing insecurity. Adopting a new belief doesn't mean you won't feel awkward. It just means you are planting a seed in the soil of your mind and refusing to dig it up every 5 minutes to check if it's growing yet. Philosophy reminds us that the mind is a garden. You don't have to wage a violent, bloody war against every single weed in the yard all at once. You simply need to plant one vibrant, beautiful flower, water it consistently, and let its roots crowd out the old overgrowth naturally. What is one limiting belief you are ready to let go of right now? And what is the single, powerful, liberating truth you are willing to plant in its place? You don't need a massive overhaul. You just need one new belief, held with gentle, unwavering conviction, to swing the door wide open. Chapter Summary. Lasting personal transformation does not require exhausting brute force discipline, but rather the identification and replacement of foundational beliefs. Actions will always align with internal identity. Trying to use external tools like budgets or schedules without shifting core beliefs leads to self-sabotage. A belief is simply a thought that has been practiced into feeling like an objective fact. Adopting a new belief may feel unfamiliar or awkward at first, but consistent reinforcement allows new neural pathways to take root naturally. Planting a single empowering belief crowds out old limitations without requiring a violent. Chapter 13, Teaching Your Brain a New Reality. Have you ever tried to teach a dog a brand new trick, or attempted to break a beloved family pet's deeply ingrained habit of greeting the delivery driver as if he were an international assassin, only to realize that repetition is the absolute price of admission for changing any living nervous system? You don't show a dog a new command once, nod politely, and expect them to execute it flawlessly while balancing a treat on their nose forevermore. You practice. You repeat. You celebrate the tiny wins, ignore the occasional confused backward roll, and patiently guide them toward the new pattern. Yet, when it comes to our own brains, complex biological masterpieces composed of billions of neurons firing electrical storms across intricate networks, we expect miracles to happen on the very first try. Let's look at this with zero drama and a healthy dose of everyday humor. Imagine you decide to break a lifelong habit of automatic self-criticism. You read an inspiring chapter, make a solemn vow, and step out into your day. For 40 minutes, you feel like a serene, enlightened master of your emotions. Then, you drop a pen on the floor, stub your toe on the coffee table, and instantly hear your internal voice pipe up with, "Smooth move, genius. You are an absolute disaster." You freeze, throw your hands up in despair, and declare, "Well, that's it. It didn't work. I'm still broken." As if a single minor slip means 40 years of neural conditioning was supposed to evaporate into thin air like morning mist. We treat our minds with the impatience of a toddler waiting for cookies to bake in a microwave, expecting instant transformation and throwing a tantrum when growth takes actual time. Psychologists and neuroscientists explain that neuroplasticity is a physical, biological process. Neural pathways are like hiking trails through a dense forest. The trail you have walked down every single day for decades is a wide, paved superhighway with neon streetlights and automated toll booths. The new, empowering belief or habit you are trying to build is barely a faint deer trail covered in twigs and fallen leaves. When you feel stressed, tired, or overwhelmed, which trail does your brain instinctively default to? It doesn't take the twig-covered deer trail, it sprints down the 6-lane superhighway because the energy cost is practically zero. That doesn't mean you failed. It simply means you have a well-traveled highway in your head, and building a new path requires persistence, patience, and a machete. The comedy of human behavior is how quickly we abandon our new habits the moment they feel difficult or unnatural. We say, well, trying to stay positive feels fake, or, setting boundaries makes me feel guilty, so it must be wrong. Of course it feels unnatural. You are clearing brush in the jungle of your mind. Every time you catch yourself slipping into an old mental loop, gently pause, refuse to beat yourself up, and consciously redirect your steps onto the new path. Think of it like learning to play the piano. The first time you sit down at the keys, your fingers stumble, your rhythm is atrocious, and you sound like a raccoon tap dancing on sheet metal. Do you slam the lid shut, burst into tears, and announce to the world that you are genetically incapable of enjoying music? No. You laugh at the discordant noise, slow down, and practice the scales again. Philosophy and self-mastery teach us that grace is the secret ingredient of lasting change. You cannot bully, shame, or berate your brain into peace and freedom. Shaming your nervous system for defaulting to old habits is like screaming at a frightened child for clinging to your hand in a thunderstorm. Instead, you teach your brain a new reality through patient, warm, unyielding repetition. You show up for yourself on the good days, and you show up with even more gentleness on the messy, chaotic days when everything feels like a step backward. Every time you catch an old limiting belief, smile at it, and replace it with an empowering truth, you add another paving stone to the new path. And before you know it, you look up and realize you are walking on a wide, sunlit superhighway of freedom, while the old cage is nothing more than a distant landmark in your rearview mirror. Chapter Summary. Rewiring the brain requires patience and consistent repetition. Expecting instant transformation after a single attempt leads to unnecessary discouragement. Neural pathways function like hiking trails, where well-worn habits form 6-lane superhighways and new beliefs begin as faint deer paths. Slipping back into old mental loops under stress is a normal part of biological rewiring, not a sign of personal failure. Treating oneself with grace and humor rather than shame or harsh discipline is essential for sustaining long-term personal growth. Patient, repeated redirection of thought physically constructs new neural pathways, turning freedom into your brain's. Chapter 14, Living Beyond the Invisible Prison. Have you ever spent weeks packing for a major trip, checking passports, rolling clothes with military precision, downloading offline maps, buying travel adapters for electrical outlets you aren't even sure exist, and stressing over every conceivable logistical catastrophe, only to arrive at your destination, step out of the airport, take a deep breath of warm evening air, and suddenly realize, oh, the trip has already started. I'm actually here. All that anxiety, all that preparation, all that mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios, and the reality was simply waiting for you to drop your bags and look around. We approach personal freedom the exact same way. We spend years reading self-help books, analyzing our childhoods, untangling our psychological knots, and preparing for the moment we will finally feel ready to live our actual lives. We act as though freedom is a certificate handed to us by an imaginary board of examiners once we have successfully healed our final flaw and achieved total emotional perfection. Let's look at this with zero drama and a healthy dose of warm humor. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that you haven't criticized yourself in the mirror for a whole 20 minutes. You pause, slightly suspicious, waiting for the other shoe to drop. You look around, check your mental inventory, and think, wait, am I actually okay right now? Is this allowed? Where is the crisis I was supposed to be managing? We are so accustomed to living inside the chronic hum of internal friction that when peace finally arrives, our brains treat it like an intruder. We feel almost restless, as if we forgot to lock a door or left an iron plugged in. Living beyond the invisible prison doesn't mean you never experience difficult emotions, stress, or challenging circumstances. Life will still throw curveballs. The washing machine will still break down on a Sunday evening, traffic will still test your patience, and people will still occasionally say things that make you roll your eyes so hard you risk injuring your optic nerves. The difference is how you meet those moments. When you live beyond the prison, you stop identifying with the automated panic of your conditioning. When fear knocks on your door, you don't invite it in, make it tea, and give it the master bedroom. You look at it, recognize it as an outdated automated security system, and politely decline its services. Psychologists and spiritual philosophers point out that true freedom is found in the spacious gap between a stimulus and your response. Inside that gap lies your ultimate sovereignty. Think about how much lighter your daily existence becomes when you stop treating every minor setback as a cosmic indictment of your worth. A missed opportunity isn't proof that you are cursed, it's simply a piece of data. An awkward social interaction isn't evidence that everyone hates you, it's just a funny human moment to chuckle about over coffee. The comedy of waking up from the invisible prison is realizing how much time, energy, and emotional sweat we wasted defending limitations that were never even real. We spent decades arguing with ghosts, fighting against shadows, and pacing back and forth inside a cage with an open door. When you step out into the wider landscape of your life, you notice something wonderful. The world hasn't changed its basic nature, but you have changed your relationship to it. You are no longer navigating life from a place of scarcity, fear, and defense. You are navigating from a place of curiosity, expansion, and quiet power. You don't need anyone's permission to live fully right now. You don't need to wait until you are flawless, fearless, or fully figured out. Drop the bags. Unclench your jaw. Step out of the enclosure. The air is warm, the horizon is wide open, and your life is waiting right here, right now. Chapter Summary. Personal freedom is not a certificate earned after achieving total emotional perfection, but a state of awareness available in the present moment. A nervous system accustomed to chronic stress often views unfamiliar peace and calm with suspicion, mistaking tranquility for a problem. Living beyond the invisible prison does not mean the absence of challenges, but rather changing how you respond to life's inevitable curveballs. True sovereignty lives in the spacious gap between an external stimulus and your internal reaction. Stepping out of mental limitations transforms your relationship with reality, replacing fear and defense with curiosity. Chapter 15, When the Door Was Never Locked. Have you ever spent 20 minutes frantically searching all over the house for your reading glasses, retracing your steps, looking under couch cushions, rummaging through desk drawers while muttering dark accusations about who in the household could possibly have moved them, only to discover with a mixture of profound relief and deep personal embarrassment that they were resting comfortably on top of your own head the entire time? We stand there holding our breath, blinking in disbelief, wondering how something so obvious could remain invisible for so long. We do the exact same thing with our lives. We spend years, sometimes decades, shaking the iron bars of an invisible prison, crying out for rescue, studying self-help maps, reading dense psychological texts, and trying every mental gymnastics routine imaginable to break free from our limitations. We bargain with the universe, wait for ideal circumstances, and plan our grand escape. And then, in a quiet moment of awareness, we reach out a hand, touch the boundary, and realize something staggering: the door was never locked. In fact, there were never any bars to begin with. The entire enclosure was constructed out of unquestioned assumptions, inherited fears, outdated childhood programming, and stories we repeated so often we mistook them for architectural laws of nature. Let's look at this final revelation with zero drama and a warm, knowing smile. Imagine waking up to the realization that you have the complete freedom to design your responses, your choices, and your identity from this moment forward. Not because your circumstances suddenly became perfect, but because you finally stopped looking at your life through the distorting lens of your conditioning. When you realize the door was never locked, your relationship with fear changes entirely. Fear no longer acts as a warden commanding you to stay inside your cell, it merely becomes a traveling companion, someone you acknowledge politely before continuing down your chosen path. You stop waiting for permission from your parents, your past, your culture, or your inner critic to step into your power. You realize that the authority you kept handing away to everyone else was yours all along, sitting quietly in the center of your consciousness, waiting for you to reclaim it. Philosophers across the ages have pointed out that enlightenment is not about acquiring something new that you didn't already possess, it is simply waking up from a dream you forgot you were dreaming. You are not broken. You never were. You were simply a magnificent, powerful human being who forgot who you were for a little while, operating out of an outdated instruction manual handed to you by people who were just as lost and scared as you were. Think about how liberating this is. Every struggle, every painful pattern, and every self-sabotaging habit you examined throughout this journey served a purpose. They weren't punishments, they were wake-up calls. They were the friction required to help you see the walls for what they really were. Now that you see them, what happens next? The choice belongs entirely to you. You can look back at the cage with gratitude for the lessons it taught you, take a deep breath of the fresh morning air, and step out into the wide, brilliant expanse of your actual life. There are no guards. There are no chains. There is only the open road, the quiet power of your awareness, and the breathtaking realization that you are, and always have been, completely free. Chapter Summary. Personal liberation reveals that life's greatest limitations were never locked prisons, but unquestioned assumptions and outdated conditioning. Recognizing that the door was never locked shifts fear from an absolute warden into a passing emotion you can observe without obeying. Reclaiming personal authority ends the habit of waiting for external permission or perfect circumstances to step into your power. Awakening to freedom is not about becoming someone new, but remembering who you truly are beneath your conditioning.